Hi there, this is just a quick video with some tuning tips for Jat's 5-inch 6S quad based on his the black boxes that he submitted, black box logs. His quad is about 650 grams with the GoPro and mount. I think it was about 550 without the GoPro and mount, something like that. So Zingy Pro motors, 1800 kV, 6S. Typical 5-inch props, that's about, I think they're about 1.6 kilos of thrust each, so about 6.5 kilos of thrust on a 650 gram quad. That's about a 10 to 1 power to weight ratio, which is very good. That's what you're aiming for. Yeah, with the GoPro, 10 to 1 power to weight ratio, that's very good, which means it has plenty of power to do anything you want it to do. 1,000 degrees a second, rolls, flips, you name it. So, the way it's currently set up, the PIDs are quite odd. I mean, a little bit odd. The master multiplier being at 1.6 is definitely odd for a 5-inch, at least one that is this powerful. Normally, you only have to push it that high on certain micro or underpowered quads rather, and I think that is definitely causing some issues that we'll see in the step analysis and stick tracking, especially the high feed forward and the PD balance, or the ratio of the P to D gains is a bit off. P is too low compared to D, which we'll see again in the step response. We're not getting the stick tracking we'd really like. Gains are mostly fine. And definitely with the camera especially, we'll notice that we need to be pushing pitch a lot higher. So we'll have a quick look. We'll start with stick tracking here. So we have set point. We'll look at pitch because that's the most affected with the weight of the battery, the LiPo, and the camera sort of acting like leverage, like a fulcrum. The weight away from the center of gravity of the quad. It's a lot harder for the quad to flip than it is to roll due to that weight. So pitch is hit the hardest. So here we will look at set point, which is our stick commands from the radio, and in green, and then we can see what the quad's actually doing, gyro in blue. So if we go to where the set point is 600 degrees, which is the max rate, where it peaks at 600 degrees, the stick command reaches 600 degrees, then we go to when the quad itself reaches 600 degrees. Right there, we can see there's 72 milliseconds of delay, which is not good, not horrible, but that's not good. You really want it to be a lot less than that. So this is latency here, and due to that, so I would say that's mostly because of the D term being too high in proportion to P. And then we can see overshoot here, where it's going past 600 by 33 degrees there. That's 34 degrees of overshoot. That's pretty bad. That's, what's that? About 5% of overshoot. That's not good. It's not too bad over here. It doesn't matter so much about the latency when you get off a maneuver. It's more about that initial rise. You want to be as fast as possible. So in comparison, if we look at one of my quads here, I mean it's a 4-inch, but the tuning is basically the same. This is set for 904 degrees, and so if we go to where the quad reaches that 904, has a tiny bit of overshoot just by a few degrees, which is fine. It reaches 904 in about 14 milliseconds. So 72 compared to 14 milliseconds. So this is not perfect, but this is much closer to how you want it. You can see there's basically zero overshoot. It's reaching set point pretty quick. Even letting go of the sticks here, you can see it's following set point pretty well. Here, especially when you let go of the sticks, is a point that the feed forward tends to overshoot. So this is quite nice. This is what you're aiming for here. So now we'll have a detailed look at the step response. Here, and I'll just reset that. We'll look at the latest flight. And we can see that, yeah, this is not exactly ideal. And I should explain exactly what you want it to look like. So with a low PD balance, high D gains compared to P, you typically get this. You get a very slow initial rise, and it might reach 1. Sometimes it doesn't even do that. And it'll peak for a bit, and then it'll come down, and it'll basically stay below set point. You want it to be on 1. The perfect case would be a very fast initial rise to 1, and then flat across the board. So that's typically what happens with low P, high D. The inverse of that, high P compared to D, would be a very sharp initial rise, spiking well above 1, and then coming down and sort of doing a little bit of oscillation here and sticking around 1 or even above 1 a little bit. This is actually pretty good. As long as you're sort of below 125, this, I would say that's ideal, at least for a freestyle chord. You could tame it down a little bit. For cinematic, doesn't matter so much, doesn't need to be super responsive, but this is very responsive and very nice. You just don't want it to be overshooting too much, and you want it to be pretty smooth. You can see this one's kind of jagged here. I'd say that's probably from too much I gains, and the D gains is not helping with that either. But if you push I too much, it starts to get a bit wavy, but it's hard to say. There's multiple things can cause this, and it could just be even this particular log. The latencies aren't too bad. As you can see here, the peak, again, just the peak's too low. We need to be pushing pitch, a lot higher now that it's carrying the camera. I might want to have 2 PID profiles, one for the camera and one without, and be pushing pitch a lot higher to deal with that weight. And yeah, it's just too much D gains. You can see that these lines on average are below 1, so that's clear evidence of too much D or not enough P. And we want these to be a little bit faster. It's not so bad on here, but as you saw in the tracking, it's not great. That's 72 milliseconds. Yeah, it's not great. So we want to sort that out. So we need to adjust some PID values, which I'll do. I have some recommendations for that. Okay, I'm just going to bring up one of my quads. It's pretty similar setup to what he's got. My quad is definitely heavier, but then again, it is running 6-inch props, but similar motors. We'll go to the PID tuning, and that's what I currently have on it, which is actually pretty conservative. I could push it a bit harder if I want, but let's just go with a blank slate. And this is my recommendation. So typically with the Betaflight defaults out of the box are sort of tuned for like a 5-inch 6S lightweight quad, so more like a racing quad, be 400 grams or something like that. So because we've got more weight, we typically always push the master multiplier a bit, but not too much. I reckon it should be between like 1 and 1.3. You typically don't have to go above that, again, unless you're underpowered. So I'll probably start around 1.15 here. And you can always adjust it later, but we want to set like a decent baseline to do some logs, and then tweak from there. And from there, we'll leave D gains as they are. I'm going to turn down I gains a bit, down about 0.85. D gains, yeah, we need to push our P gains higher, for sure. Probably I'll do about 1.160. Also, we want to get rid of D max. We just want fixed D gains. So this is a good typical balance, about 60-40, or rather, another way to put it is the D should be about 2/3 of the P. Typically, again, every chord is different, and that PD balance can vary a bit, but that is a good starting point for a typical 5-inch quad, especially a 6S1, the way he's got it set up. Now, as we saw with the camera, we need to push pitch higher, so we'll do that. We're going to push pitch up maybe a bit, 1 point bit. Yeah, it was pretty low. We'll push it up 115. Our feed forward, again, I'd put that down to 0.9. Yeah, that looks about right. I'll leave the... Yeah, I think this is a good starting point for now. 110. Yeah, this is a good starting point. Make sure you've loaded your preset for your radio link, which I think you already did. Thrust linearization should be off if you're running 24 kilohertz, which you definitely should be on this setup. Start from here with these PIDs, switch to these, do some logs, and we'll see how we go. But that should definitely address some of those step response issues. Now, as to filtering, we will get to that as well. Let's take a look. We're in noise plots. Okay, good. Let's take a look at the raw, because we had the resonance, as we can see here, which is on 64 kilohertz exactly, this is with the camera. Even without the camera, there is a bump there, as we can see, around that same sort of mark, 64. It's still there, but as you can see, it's much lower amplitude than with the camera, which is curious. So I'm thinking this could be because this is the Source 1 V5 frame, which I have heard reports from users that there is some resonance issues with this frame. So I'm thinking it might be the intrinsic resonance of the frame, and it's just being sort of exacerbated or made worse with the addition of either sort of that weight away from the CG or the TPU and everything specifically itself. Its resonant mode. So either way, we can see that the fundamental frequency of this resonance is 64 hertz. And with harmonic resonance, you get harmonics, or sort of, I guess you could say, not exactly echoes, but you get sympathetic vibrations at multiples of the fundamental frequency. So in this case, the fundamental frequency is 64. So there should be vibrations at 128, like 192 to 56, 384, at multiples of that 64. And with some objects, most objects will have harmonics at every multiple. Some objects, depending on their construction and shape and whatnot, will have harmonic resonance at like odd multiples. So in this case, I noticed that there were some spikes at 192 and at 384, although you won't see the 384 here so much, a tiny bit here on the roll. But if you go to pitch, look at this, big spike right on 384, perfectly on 384. Now that's not a coincidence. So that is a multiple of 64. So Chris Rosser explains this. I'm not going to attempt to, in this video at least, that vibration modes can affect certain axes more than others, or a vibration in roll can cause vibrations in pitch, and vice versa. So again, we have the 192, so the multiple of 3, and then the multiple of 6. So sort of the odd multiples causing spikes there, yeah. Now, the good thing, of course, these harmonics here, they're up high frequencies, above 100 hertz, so they get filtered out. If we go to filtered gyro, they're pretty much gone. The problem with this, the fundamental harmonic, a 64 is very low. It's a very low frequency. You typically can't really filter down that low, at least you don't want to, because it causes such massive delay. Filters with that low cutoff have a very large delay, very large latency to them, which will severely impact the quad most of the time. So this is not being filtered at all. It's still there. And the way that this is currently set up with the very high D gains, which I think these are much too high for this build. Typically you want to run like 30 to 40. You go slightly on above 40 on very clean builds, which evidently this is not because of that spike there. And normally when you've mitigated like as much noise as possible, like soft mounting motors and very clean build, and even maybe putting damping grease on your bolts and in your carbon and all kinds of things. So this is a very high D gain. So that means that it's causing that spike in the gyro here to get blown up quite high. This is noticeable. Anything sort of above, in my opinion, sort of around here is noticeable in terms of increased motor temperature, and even in the flight field itself, you can definitely notice this spike. It'll be causing some, how do I put it, sort of a grittiness. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it. Like once you feel it, you definitely notice it. Yeah, you can't can't really ignore it. I mean, it's not crazy high, but this is enough to be concerned about. Now, I wouldn't actually bother filtering this. If you can't remove it in the first place, if it's intrinsic to the frame, well, you know, that's normally your first solution. Just try to get rid of the source of noise. Can't do that? Well, then you might have to filter it. In this case, I wouldn't actually bother filtering it because it's very difficult to filter it in the first place. I mean, we can do it. I can show a way to do that, but there are trade-offs. What I would do is with those PIDs that I just suggested earlier, this, with much lower D, around 40, this is going to come down anyway. We're going to bring down the amplitude. By bringing down the D gains, we're going to bring down how much it's amplifying that gyro gain and bring it down a lot more. So it shouldn't actually be an issue. If I put this back to default, I think we could probably drop this in half just by changing our D gains. And there, you know, it's annoying that it's there. It's technically not as efficient. The motors might get a little bit warm, but it's not like anything to be majorly worried about. So that's what I would do. Just change those PIDs. There are some weird issues with the filtering here as well, which we need to address. For instance, there's no PT1 at all on the gyro, which is a bad idea due to aliasing. I'll explain that. And I think we need to modify the dynamic notch. And I don't like the way that the D-term filtering is just a single biquad. That's not a very, at a low cutoff, that's not very ideal at all. Anyway, so yeah, you can see the noise. So yeah, let's get into filtering. If we look at some plots, here we can see some more step analysis where the orange is set point, blue is the gyro. They should be lining up. We can see that the gyro is overshooting on all these full stick movements. It's overshooting considerably on pitch and roll, even a little bit on yaw too. So that's probably from that high feed forward from the 1.6 master multiplier. So we'll address that and clean up these step response charts a bit. If we look, let's just switch to frequency throttle, roll, our primary motor band, and then we have a harmonic of it down here. There's only really two. I mean, technically, yeah, there's three. Or rather, there's the primary and the two. Let's do a frequency X throttle here. The primary motor band and then the two harmonics of it. You can only really see the primary and the first harmonic. You can't really see the second one. So my point is regarding the filtering, I would change it to, let's just sort of put beta flight defaults here. 1-1, yeah. So he's currently got it. Jet currently has his set up with 3 harmonics on the RPM and only 1 on the dynamic notch. So I would make both of those 2. So we want 2 RPM filter harmonics and 2 on the notch, and increase the Q factor to 500. That's the tightness of that notch, or the narrowness rather. Narrower notches have less latency. You can leave these 100, 600, around 100, because it has the 50 fade range on it, so it won't really kick in until 150 hertz, which is good, because if you look at that motor band, about 150 hertz, that's pretty much where it starts, so that's perfect. You can disable your low pass 1 as he currently has it off. Make sure you have a low pass 2, okay, because of the gyro is running at a 8K loop time, and your PID loop is not. And even if it was, you pretty much always want at least one low pass, an additional low pass to the gyro. I mean, a lot of gyros, especially like the MPU 6500 and whatnot, they have an inbuilt low pass filter, but there's no harm to adding one of these. At 500, it's only 0.3 milliseconds of delay. You could change that up to 1000, and it's only 0.2 milliseconds delay. It's just good. Just have it. There's no downsides at all, and it is helping. I think his loop times were 312. So that's, what is that? I think that's 3.2K loop time or something. Is it? It's 1000 divided by 312. Yeah, 3.2K loop time. Okay. So yeah, definitely that'll be causing aliasing. So yeah, run that. Set it to whatever you want. You can just use the slider if you want and push that. Yeah, anything from like 500 to 1000. With your D-turn, you can turn that off, turn off low pass. At least use your dynamic low pass, and again, you can push that a bit. Maybe I'd probably push both of these up to around 1.3. Looks like my cord is disconnected again. Tiny USB cable. Okay. Filtering, yeah, there we go. Use the sliders if you want. Push them up to probably around 1.3, 1.4, whatever. You can even push, yeah, 1.3. Yeah, these are fine. Put them to whatever you want. Just disable this. Make sure these are set up this way. And yeah, that's what I would do for now. Something like this. You don't really need the second low pass. Up to you. I'd probably do a flight with it and then turn it off and do another flight. Once we see what the initial D-turn noise is. But yeah, you want to use PT1s, not biquads. So we've got this, and now I'm going to show you can do a notch, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. And we would want that to be a very tight notch, directly dealing with that 64 hertz. And we want it to be extremely tight, so we put the cutoff as close as we can. And this is one way that you could directly target that spike. And this would completely suppress at 100% at the cost of a bunch of delay. So I'll show that now. Let me just disconnect my cord. And we're going to open up Mark Spatz's lovely Betaflight filter delay calculator. And so there is a pretty loose high cutoff D-term low pass. This is the dynamic one, 150 to 300 hertz, which is, I think, the max that Betaflight will do with a slider. You push it all the way to the right, all the way to 2. This is what you get. Pretty good. Only 0.8 milliseconds of delay on that. So that's pretty nice. It's not adding much delay at all. You can see a tiny bit here brings the overall still to below 2 milliseconds of overall delay, which is nice. So what you could do, let's just turn this off for a minute. We'll go to that dynamic notch, 70, 69. It's very tight, very narrow, because by default, cutoff is probably normally around like 30, 40, like normally close to 50, 70% of the center. That widens it out. That adds a lot of delay, see? And it's all across the band. So we tighten this up as close as we can get it, make it very narrow. See, around that 70 hertz, 64, it will completely attenuate that signal down to 0 without affecting the stick inputs. And it's not horrible. Again, it brings the overall delay though from like to around 2 milliseconds with the regular low pass, brings it up to like 4.5, but only in between 60 and 80 hertz here, as you can see, which this is not terrible. Again, this will slightly compromise your prop wash handling, because as you can see, this in between sort of 20, 80 or 20 to 100 hertz is where you get prop wash. So you want your delay to be as low as possible there, so the quad can respond as fast as possible to that prop wash to deal with it. So if you cause too much delay here, it's just not fast enough to even try to combat the prop wash. So this is not horrible. I mean, I've never tried this before, personally, setting a static notch below 100 hertz, but at least just going by these values here, this is not too bad. Below 5 milliseconds of delay, and especially only in this 20 hertz band, this is something you could do. But again, I don't think there's any point, just by bringing down your D terms anyway, that noise shouldn't be that much of a problem. So I wouldn't bother with this, but I'm just showing that you could do that if you wanted to, and it's not horrible. But I'll just stick with your regular dynamic low pass. Even if you halved this, 75 to 150, it's still not very much. 1.5 milliseconds of delay. Yeah, that's still pretty good. So just push that slider maybe to 1.5 on the D term. Make sure you got your low pass on your gyro, whatever you want, 500 hertz, 1000 hertz. Make sure you got that, as you can see here. And obviously the RPM and the dynamic notch, all those should be on. And yeah, you're good to go. So that was pretty quick. I will be covering everything I talked about here. I'll be covering in much more detail in future videos anyway. So yeah, anyway, I hope that was helpful. Just go with the PIDs that I suggested and take some logs, and we'll go from there and see what changes that is made to the D-term noise and to the step response. I expect that to improve a lot. To be honest, it should like much more, you know, like this. And you want the roll and pitch to be as close as possible. But yeah, I want it to be much more like this red line. So yeah, cheers.